All right, hi, Joe Leo with Brown Winnick. I know a few people here. We're going to talk cap tables. I promise not to speed through, but if you have questions, I'll be around for lunch or afterwards. We can jump in. So, does everyone here have a cap table? Who here wants to admit that they don't have a formal cap table currently? All right, I like it. Okay, so what is it? At a very basic level, it's typically a spreadsheet. Increasingly people are using other services that I'll talk about that just simply shows who owns what in your company. Now that sounds very straightforward for who owns interest currently. The problem is that with cap tables, they want to show all interest in your company. So people who have options, if you have convertible debt, if you have somebody who has any right at some point, either now or in the future, to own part of your company, then you have to show that on the cap table. So that's the purpose of it. Why do you need one? This is an early question you're going to get from investors because they want to know who owns your company. And probably in a lot of ways, they want to make sure that you know who owns your company. I've had a lot of experiences with early stage companies that I've represented who that's not as clear as what most people would like. And so if you're going to go out and raise money, step number one, let's figure out who owns the company currently. And can I hire somebody is the third piece that we're going to talk about. The answer is yes. I used to be more down on the companies that would help you maintain your cap table, but I think that the pricing on those has gotten better, and some of the tools that they give you make it a better value, although I can tell you that the more shareholders you have in your company, the more expensive those things get quickly. So,
can I just make a point there?
Yeah.
Joe's not going to kind of self-promote him. I would say either use a lawyer or use a company. I've seen too many companies get into trouble where they're trying to manage their own cap table, and it just gets messed up, and it can cause a lot of problems long term. So I would say as an entrepreneur, there's a lot of things that you learn to do yourself. That's kind of one area that I think you'll have a benefit of using someone external to help you with.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I would tell you that if you don't do these all the time, there's a lot of pitfalls that people fall into.
It'll also scare the hell out of your investors if you're doing your own.
So usually a spreadsheet shows who owns the company, has equity rights. This is the piece that gets complicated. Is it'll show common shares, preferred shares, options, safe notes, which are just convertible debt, and warrants. Aren't used as much, but I have them. And so basically it should show you that overall who has what interest in the company. So a lot of people think about it as who owns it now. I'm telling you is that it goes further than that, and you need to be careful about making sure that you understand that piece of it. Why do I need one? You need to prepare for investor due diligence. This is going to be an early question that you get, and it's going to be a stumble that will make investors very nervous if you don't have a handle on this, right? And it's one of those things that I find that trouble compounds itself. I've had a couple of clients who've tried to maintain their own, and they did weird things like keep it as a percentage as opposed to the number of shares that they had outstanding, which is impossible to do. Don't try to do that. But every round of investment that you've taken, if you've made an error early on, it gets worse and worse as it goes. It doesn't get better, right? And so the only way to fix it is to sit down, double down, and get that figured out. I tell a lot of my clients that this is sort of like doing your own plumbing, right? If you have a plumber who comes in and you've been monkeying around in your house, and I'm kind of one of the worst, people who does little fixes here and there. Jake and I were talking about my fixes a minute ago. It ultimately will cost you more money to have somebody come in who knows what they're doing and fix what you've done, right? I guarantee that with 100% certainty. If you're doing it yourself and you don't know what you're doing, and then you have to have somebody come in and help you, it will cost you more in the long run. The thing I think of it in terms of things being a cost and a benefit that you have. Don't always think of your cap table as just something that you have to do. It really helps you plan your future capital raises if you have it set up correctly. And so a lot of times questions, Sharice was talking early on about, as you get into more sophisticated investors, they're looking to own 20-25% of your company, and they're going to expect a certain level of return. You can use your cap table to kind of plan that and make sure that you're structuring in a way that'll work so that you don't kind of paint yourself into a corner. And so I think the example that I gave you, and I think Mike will make it available in the spreadsheet that I use, it'll help you kind of come up with scenarios in which how much am I planning on raising, what does that impact my valuation, and so I use that with clients to kind of sit down and think through, are we raising too much, are we raising too little, what does that do long term to our ownership, and those kind of things. Understand how convertible debt and options will impact you at exit. Options, by their very nature, are used, and we'll talk a little bit more later about why you would use them. Those are going to sit on your cap table. They don't dilute investors up front, but if you sell your company, hopefully in the way that you'd like to, there's going to be a whole bunch of options that are going to get exercised right before that sale, right? And so being cognizant of what that does to your ownership percentage is important, and the cap table helps you to do that. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep track of my time here. The answer is, question is, can I hire somebody to do this? Recently, there's been a whole bunch of services that I think have gotten better than when I looked at them last. The one that seems that people have been using the most is Carta. Is anyone here familiar with Carta or has used Carta? Yeah. So Carta, I can tell you the huge benefit that I didn't see. Their onboarding process is fairly robust, and so it is good at identifying issues that you have in your cap table. And I've gone through this maybe with 3 or 4 clients where we've onboarded, and it really shows you, hey, we're missing documentation of X, Y, or Z. And so, I think that process is worthwhile to go through, and it will help you. And then they also sell some kind of add-on services, which a lot of them do, like valuation pieces for equity comp. The problem is that it can be pretty costly. They charge you per entry on your cap table per month. And so I have a lot of clients that, this may sound counterintuitive, but have a lot of shareholders on their cap table that would just never use it if there's not a lot of change. But like I said, in the past I've been more down on them, but the pricing seems to come down, and like I said, the value they've given are better. But there's a whole bunch of different providers, some better than others, and I think it's worth considering. Keep in mind that when you do this, the biggest piece that I have had issues with is your investors. If you have investors who aren't as tech savvy, a lot of them require them to log in and accept their certificates and that kind of thing. I get a lot of additional questions from people who say, like, what is this? Why am I getting this email? What does that mean? And so, so there's a little bit of a change from the investors that they're not used to. Questions about that? So, I swear that this isn't me just selling that because maintaining cap tables is tedious and time consuming. I'm happy to do it, but like I said, I think that those services have been getting better.
But actually, Joe, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you mentioned issuing certificates. That's part of what they do?
Yeah, what they do is they don't actually issue you physical certificates. You have, at least Carta I know does it this way. I think all of them that I've looked at do, where you essentially have a virtual certificate. A lot of your older investors, and I'm not trying to, I'm not being ageist here, they're really focused. They like to have certificates. Most companies, from a legal standpoint, the certificate is irrelevant to your ownership, but it gives them something to say, I have this. In prior times, those actually had more value. People put them in a safety deposit box and that kind of thing. But these ones, they're all online. And so if your investor pool is not used to dealing with that, you get a lot of questions about it. Other questions? Yeah. Keep these updated at all times. This is one of those pieces I'll talk a little bit about preparing for due diligence later. It truly is one of those things that if you do it as you go, it'll take you less time than if you try to go back and remember what happened and try to recreate things in the past. And so you should be ready to deliver a cap table at all times. And the times that you typically would make changes are anytime you issue new equity in your company. Obviously, you're going to want to update your cap table. Anytime that you have kind of convertible debt that converts, update your cap table. As you issue options, it's good to keep that information on your cap table current. So you're going to hopefully be in there all the time working on them. Because you don't want to get behind. It's one of those housekeeping things that I think creates a problem. And like I said, I think it helps you to make good decisions and make them quickly. Understanding the dilutive effect of raising capital, looking at the actual math of if I raise this much money, what does it do? If I have this valuation, what does it do? I find a lot of my clients, I'm not saying that valuation isn't important, but I think what you'll find is raising a smaller round at a lower valuation can have a lesser impact than raising a big round, even if you're a slightly higher valuation. And I think a lot of times, myself included, until you actually run the math, it's hard to really understand what those things are. I think sometimes my clients and entrepreneurs, they really focus on that valuation piece, but until you actually run the numbers, it may not have as big of an impact as over-raising, or also, keeping in mind that if you under-raise, but you're sitting there waiting for this high valuation you're not getting, you're taking yourself out of the market. And so really understanding the math, I think if you've got a well-constructed cap table, it'll help you do that. Questions about that?
I have a question about the acquired by investors. Do you have any obligation I do the attorney, does the entrepreneur have any obligation to the current shareholders about who they share the cap table with, and in terms of privacy or acquiring an NDA or any kind of, how public should we, how should we be thinking about cap tables in terms of sharing people?
They don't typically include a lot of identifying information on, they'll have people's names. The thing to keep in mind is if you have a shareholder who's told you that they're sensitive about that, certainly coming up with a way to identify them on your cap table without using their name is fine. Keep in mind though, from a legal standpoint, once that investor makes an investment in your company, I get this question a lot, they have rights to know who the other owners are in most instances. And so I know in Iowa, a shareholder in a company or a member in an LLC has information rights that would let them know who the rest of the owners are. And so I don't typically get a lot of pushback, but it's not something you're going to want to, you would deliver a cap table to an investor who's interested. You wouldn't post it on your website, if that makes sense, right? And if anyone tells you they're sensitive about it, you can certainly come up with, when you're talking to an investor, I wouldn't do it with an NDA. I might just put anonymous investor or an individual or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I have not run into that. I certainly, we don't pass them around willy-nilly, but you also, I've not had investors who push back on it. And most of the time, they want you to raise money too. So if that's the stepping stone, they're fine with that. All right. Make sure that your tables are understandable. I'm not saying that the way that I do it is the only way to do it. I'm not saying it's even the best way to do it. There are lots of different ways to keep a cap table. But the one thing you want to do is use a structure that other people have kind of tested out and that aren't idiosyncratic to your accounting thought pattern. And Mike, I think, hit the same thing in your financial model is, when you're looking at a spreadsheet of information, if it doesn't make sense or there's weird parts to it that are hard to understand, you're going to turn investors off. It's that one thing that is easier for them to say, this confuses me, I don't want to look at it. And so use models that people have used before and that make sense. And the other piece that I think that comes up frequently is make sure you keep your supporting documents in one spot. So share purchase agreements, option grants, those kind of documents that you use to create your cap table, make sure that you keep them in some spot because it's possible that investors are going to want to come in and look at some of those backing documents. And probably the most important one and this is where I always cringe a little bit with having some third party do it, is make sure that you personally understand it enough. If I create your cap table for you, more than likely I'm not in every investor meeting with you. And so it can't be one of those things that you say, somebody else needs to deal with this, I've paid them, they've created this for me, and now I never think about it. Because you do need to be able to explain it, right? In the same way you need to talk about your financial model, make sure that you understand it at a level. It's not to say that you have to have all of the answers, but you also need to be able to be conversant enough to explain it to somebody who at least has some idea of what a cap table is, okay? All right, so these are in your book. I'm not going to walk through them to too much things, but the way I structure mine, my cap tables are a couple of ways. Name. This is where you lay out all of your ownership between the different kinds of securities that you've issued: stock, common stock, preferred stock. Keep in mind that as you grow, you'll probably need to add more columns here if you have more than one series of stock. That's where things get kind of complicated. My cap table, which I think is helpful, but other people do it different ways, shows your ownership on what's called the diluted and an undiluted basis. So diluted means we take all the options into effect, all the safe notes, all those things, and convert them and say, if we sold for $1 billion tomorrow, who's going to want to own the company, right? And then the other one is who owns it as of today. The reason you show both is one is like a voting interest, like if I have to get something approved, who actually has a vote today. The other one is more sales focused. If we sold the company, who's gonna step up and be an owner. Okay, so it gets a little confusing with these percentages and votes, but that's what you'll want to have. Like I said, if you download it and you have questions, I'll be happy to answer how they work. I've included kind of some valuation scenarios that I use. The highlighted pieces are the ones that you can change down here. And this is where I talked about it helps you kind of anticipate what dilution you might have. Equally as important is a share registry. So if you've issued certificates, or even if you don't issue certificates, understanding what the name is of the person who owns, what date you issued, and how many shares that you issued is important to keep track of. This is more, kind of housekeeping than you want probably, but you need to keep that information so you can keep track of who owns it, especially if you need to recreate. All right. I think these are just all on that spreadsheet. It's the same thing. This is a share certificate for Series A that is just in the spreadsheet if you want to use it.
Anybody that wants the actual spreadsheet, you could find enough to give us the spreadsheet version. Just send me an email.
Where's your email?
Go, Troy.
I'll get it.
Does it enable, or does it, this is, I guess, the question, would it look different if people are investing schedules?
Yeah, so a lot of times with vesting schedules, it wouldn't on a what's called a fully diluted cap table, meaning we assume that all those people vest 100%.
Okay.
But you are going to want to keep it, so like a schedule of keeping like options and those kind of things, you're going to want to know when they vest. If for nothing else, then if they leave, you want to be able to quickly and concisely kind of figure out what they leave with. So restricted stock or options, you would track that. Okay. Other questions?
So taking this all the way out, a cap table for like Ford or HP is probably just an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, they have, those ones will have companies and databases that keep track of all that information. The thing that's funny is like when you IPO a company, a lot of those are held in what's called street name, meaning a broker owns, a billion shares that are actually owned by all their customers. And so there are usually large blocks that don't matter, but it gets to be a nightmare the bigger you have. I have one right now. My biggest one that we help maintain is 1,600 investors, but they're all common. So it's just tracking transfers and certificates and that kind of thing. But no, it takes some work. So. And there's the online version. As you get bigger, there are like actual downloadable software that you can use that might be more cost effective. But like I said, it's if you've ever maintained a really big one, you'll know the heartburn that goes along with it.
This might be a bit early, but do you have to do like KYC when you're bringing on money, like know your customer stuff, like know where the money's coming from?
Some countries you do. I've had some international clients that I've had to, we've had to get that from a banking standpoint. My subscription agreements have representations and warranties that say I'm not on the blocked list, like, that kind of thing. But for the most part, it really comes in. And I actually encourage people to work with their banks, is that international wires trigger it, those kind of things. If somebody's going to send you like a money order from, Nigeria, obviously, a couple of questions might be in order. Most of the time it's not a big issue, but like I said, the times that you touch it are international wires. I just closed a deal for $3 million that was coming from China, and so the bank helped us jump through a whole bunch of regulatory hoops. It ultimately is fine. I mean, obviously, if they're legitimate investors, it's not a problem. But
So within the U.S., you're pretty cool.
we rely on those. I mean, obviously, if the money comes from someplace strange, I find the banks. I had the first thing. I don't know if you guys have had this, but where the banks are pushing back on opening bank accounts for certain companies, and which has been hard. I mean, a lot of that is, I find that those are usually the times that stop it, but not local investors. I mean, for the most part, you can do a little due diligence, but we'll rely on it. So.
On some of the equity crowdfunding platforms will advertise as a differentiator that they'll only take up one line on your cap table.
I'm going to cover that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
Great question.
the question was just going to be, is if that's an administrative advantage or if there's a strategic advantage?
Probably both. For the legitimate ones that, I'm not saying that those are illegitimate, but having one person on your cap table as opposed to 10 will reduce your costs of maintaining your cap table, corresponding with your investors, avoiding headaches that are associated with investors. We'll talk a little bit about that. The crowdfunding just opens up Pandora's box of other
Okay.
issues. So. All right, great. Thank you.